Ishita Das, and I am a cell and molecular biology PhD student at the University of Michigan. Today I will be telling you about how for our DNA, it's construction season all year long. Our bodies are made up of trillions and trillions of cells. Inside these cells is our DNA. This DNA is essentially like an instruction guide for our cells so that they work properly. Interestingly, if you take the DNA inside one cell and stretch it out, it ends up being as long as a basketball player. So how is our DNA compacted into one of these tiny, tiny cells? Our DNA looks like a spiral staircase, and this DNA is wound up and wound around these bead-like structures, and this is then further wound up and compacted into a structure called a chromosome. And this is what is inside a cell. And our cells actually have multiple chromosomes, and these all together provide that instruction guide for our cells so that they work properly. The cells in our bodies are constantly growing and duplicating. It's happening right now. So when our cells are being duplicated, the DNA inside the cell needs to be copied as well so that these new cells contain that instruction guide they need to function correctly. And this process of copying the DNA is called DNA replication. However, as you can imagine, if you were hand copying an instruction guide, you would make mistakes. The cell makes mistakes as well. And this can change the instruction guide a little bit. Further mistakes can happen during this copying process, and this can scramble up our DNA, which can, again, lead to scrambling up of our instruction guide, and the cells may not function correctly. So one way of causing DNA damage is during this replication process. Unfortunately, our DNA can be damaged in a lot of other ways as well. So a lot of us like to go to the beach for vacation where there's a lot of sunlight, and UV light from the sun causes the DNA inside our cells to get damaged. This makes our cells angry since their instruction guide is now messed up and they can't function correctly. So we encounter a lot of sources of DNA damage every day, one being the sun, like I just mentioned. Some others are encounters with air pollution, smoking cigarettes. This can also lead to damages in our DNA, and if you're unfortunately exposed to high doses of radiation, this can also cause these breaks in our DNA. So when our DNA is damaged, this again will make some changes in our instruction guide, but this may not completely affect the function of our cells, and they may still be able to function relatively correctly. But if you keep on getting more damages in your DNA, this eventually will lead to a lot of changes in the instruction guide and a lot of scrambling up of these instructions, and this can lead to the cell becoming abnormal. And our bodies a lot of times sense these abnormal cells and actually target them to die. However, sometimes these cells escape this targeted pathway, and what results is that they keep on growing, and they grow very quickly and fast. And eventually, this is how tumors are formed. You get cells that don't function properly growing very quickly in an uncontrolled manner, and these tumors eventually can lead to deleterious diseases, including, for example, cancer. So luckily, our bodies actually have ways to make sure our DNA stays intact. And this is called the DNA damage response. And I like to think of it as a group of construction workers who are working 24/7. They're on the clock all day long, every day, making sure that our DNA, this very important instruction guide for our cells, is always correct. So here we have our DNA shown as a ladder structure, and you have all these construction workers that are working constantly to make sure that this DNA is intact. However, when our DNA is damaged and there's a break in the DNA, some of these workers sense this break. Some others will tell to ring this alarm, And this alarm then tells all these other workers to kind of stop what they're doing to allow repair of this damaged DNA. Unfortunately, these workers don't necessarily always know how to repair this damaged DNA. So what happens is you get these repair construction workers that come in. As you can see, they have different tools and they have different expertise, and so they are needed to repair any damaged DNA. And so they all work together, and eventually the damage is repaired, and they're all happy, and our cells are happy because we have an intact DNA, and the cell can continue to copy this DNA, and the cell can continue to grow. So, what happens if these DNA repair construction workers maybe forget their tools, or some of them may not even show up to work that day, and this results in these breaks in the DNA persisting, and they're not fixed, and that instruction guide doesn't get repaired. It remains damaged, and our cells aren't getting the complete instructions they need to function properly, and that can, like I mentioned earlier, eventually lead to tumor formation. And so all the different construction workers involved, how they all work together, what precise roles they each play in this process isn't well understood. And my thesis focuses on one of these workers. And I found that this worker is able to actually cut DNA. And so you can imagine that during this process of repairing this DNA, which isn't actually linear like it's shown here, but is actually compacted and wound up, you might need to remove some DNA that's in the way of actually repairing the break. And so that is where the protein I study functions within this whole process of repairing our damaged DNA. And so we now know that our DNA is damaged every day. Luckily, we have this DNA damage response and a group of these repair construction workers that come in and fix our damaged DNA. Sometimes when these repair workers don't function correctly, this can lead to abnormal cells, and these abnormal cells can continue to grow, leading to tumor formation. And so many cancer patients are treated through radiation therapy or chemotherapy. And interestingly, the way these work is that they induce a lot of breaks in our DNA. The idea being that when the DNA is damaged so much, these tumor cells will then be targeted to die. On top of this, a lot of chemotherapy drugs also target these construction workers, making sure that these construction workers aren't trying to repair this damaged DNA. And so you get a persistence of all this broken DNA, and this eventually will lead to these tumor cells dying and removal of the tumor. And so radiation and chemotherapy target fastly growing cells, which tumor cells are, but unfortunately there are other cells in our bodies that also grow quickly, including hair cells and immune system cells. And that's why a lot of cancer patients lose their hair and their immune systems are compromised when they go under radiation or chemotherapy treatment. And so by studying all the different workers involved in repairing our DNA, we can develop more targeted therapies that can hopefully reduce the side effects of either radiation or chemotherapy, which is currently what is being used to treat cancer patients. So today I've shown you that our bodies function all the time to repair any damaged DNA, which occurs every day. Once our DNA is intact, our cells are happy because that instruction guide is intact, and this eventually leads to our bodies working properly. Thank you for your time.